Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. The topic for today is occupation, Iraq and Palestine. And with us we have two guests who will be discussing those topics in the context of the Middle East. Farideh Farhi, welcome and thank you for coming. And Ramsis Lutfy, thank you for coming and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And we have earlier talked last semester, like in May, we talked about what was going on in the Middle East, especially in Palestine and Iraq, because it was very hot topic. And now it's still a hot topic, so we want to revisit those kinds of issues again and see what is really going on and where has the United States where the United States is, in fact, in terms of the Middle East and in terms of world politics also. So, Farideh, would you like to start by saying your impressions about what's going on since last May?
It's difficult to do because so many things have happened. In the case of Iraq, I think it's quite obvious that while the United States was quite prepared militarily for war, it had not done what it needed to do, the kind of preparation that it had to do to be prepared for what comes afterwards, effectively to bring back a kind of normalcy to life in Iraq, some basic and minimum things that had to be done to bring about economic and political stability in Iraq have not happened. And as you well know, since this is pre-recorded today, a major suicide bombing occurred, leading to the death of many United Nations workers. So in the case of Iraq, a lot needs to be done in terms of United States coming to terms with its own military action. In relationship to Palestine also, what we see, despite the fact that presumably efforts were made to bring back a peace process, this time called the roadmap, it has stalled over and over again for a variety of reasons, including the continuation of violence, but also the fact that neither of the parties are willing to do what is required of them within the context of the roadmap, which is to deal with what is considered to be the extremists within their own camps. Within the context of Israel, that means stopping the settlements, which has not occurred. That is to say, despite the fact that one of the major requirements of the roadmap is to stop, and in fact, not only stop, but to pull back from the settlements. The building of the settlements have continued, and the Prime Minister designate of the Palestinian Authority has been unable to do its task, its delegated task, which is presumably to stop the violence from the extremists. So we are in a situation where, as you suggested, looking back to May, we have a much more tenuous and difficult situation facing the United States government in the region.
Good. Ramsis, would you concur, or was there other things that you would like to say?
I definitely do. You remember the last time I said there was no need for the war in Iraq at all, and we also mentioned, what's happening in Palestine, and in the historical context, obviously, the radical Arab nationalism is the main block or enemy in the face of control by the United States of the Middle East. The interests of the United States in the Middle East has the most dangerous element, which is defined as the radical nationalism, Arab nationalism. And of course, this is shared between the United States and Israel, to the extent that now Israel is the most indispensable element for the United States policies. And obviously, I mean, you can see that there is an axis between Washington and Tel Aviv, and this axis is feeding back and forth. Like, for example, Bush's advisors saying to Israel at one point, don't care and don't abide by these kinds of plans, peace plans and so on, and like Oslo, neglect it. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, Tel Aviv telling Washington, advising Washington to launch war on Iraq and eventually attack Syria and Iran and so on. So these are interests that are very commonly held by both sides. And that's why the whole thing is going to get into more serious and serious messes in the future.
Yeah, I interviewed Robert Stiver, and he's Christian, I think Baptist, and also a member of Sabeel chapter in Hawaii, which is an ecumenical peace organization, and based in Jerusalem, but has chapters in Hawaii, in the United States, including Hawaii, and in Europe as well. So when we're ready, we can roll the tape, and then we can talk more about those issues.
Sabeel means the way. It's a Christian ecumenical movement in Palestine that was founded, I think, in 1989 by Canon Naim Atik, who is an Anglican prelate. He was educated in the United States. He's a charming, wonderful spiritual man. And he was invited through a University of Hawai'i program in March 2002 to educate us in Hawaii about his program. And I attended one of his sessions right here at Church of the Crossroads, and I went to another one at the university in Mānoa on the campus. And that was another turning point in my life, because I was a baby Christian still at that time, and I realized that here was a movement and a person I could relate to very well, and other people who felt very similarly to me formed a group here in Hawaii that we call Friends of Sabeel in Hawaii. And we are working earnestly toward peace with justice in the Holy Land for both Israel and the Palestinians.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we were talking about in the interview is that, the history. For people to try and understand what's going on in Palestine right now and Israel is to understand the history of Palestine. So I have a few maps here. I want to show like a couple or maybe 3 maps on the Alamo to show you some kind of idea about Palestine and Israel. So if we're ready with the Alamo. Yeah, this is a map that shows the first Zionist colony in Palestine in 1878. All these red areas are like Palestinian villages, Arab villages. These are towns, main towns. And there was one, these are main towns that are actually mixed, like Jews and Arabs, Christians and Muslims, that is, and very few Jews in those areas, in these major towns. But there was only one colony in Palestine in 1878, and this is it, this is the one. That's 1878. Now, 1947, just by contrast, by way of contrast, this is the partition plan that was done by the United Nations with a lot of arm twisting by the United States and Great Britain at the time. And these would be the Arab areas, whereas you have like Arabs in Palestine at that time in 1947, you had about a million plus Arabs in Palestine and about 500, 600,000 Jews after a lot of migration. And the 600,000 Jews would have taken more land than the Arab majority. This is the Arab majority area. But by 1949, after the 1948 war, the Israelis, with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, the Israelis would take even more than the partition plan gives them. So all of this then would be Israel, and the West Bank and part of Gaza, which is now called the Gaza Strip, would be for the Arabs. Okay, so that's just to give you an idea about that. And then on top of this, in 1967, Israel occupies, after the 1967 war, not only Gaza and the West Bank, but in Syria, the Golan Heights right here, which is Syrian land, and the Sinai in Egypt, you know, all this. So this is just to give us an idea about the history of how Palestine was, was depopulated, and how Israel came to existence. So for people to work for peace in the Middle East would have to know that particular history. So any more on that, Ramsis?
Well, I think it would help if we sort of quantified it. Well, the partition plan gave the Israeli, or the State of Israel, 53% of the land, of the pre-partition land of Palestine, and gave the Arabs 47%. Now, after the first...
So you're talking about the partition plan on the Alamo, like, for instance,
although, as you said, you mentioned a few minutes ago, that the Israelis were only constituted only 1/3 of the local population after they had injected a lot of Jews from Europe. And later on, after the 48 war, Israel grabbed much more land than the partition plan has given them.
That's
it amounted, it amounted to 78% of the land area of the pre-partition Palestine. And then in 67 they encroached more, and eventually the Arabs were confined to 22% of the original area.
So if we look back at the Alamo, just to give you an idea, so this is the 22% we're talking about, and in fact, you know, in the partition plan, it was 53%. Yeah, the Israelis took 53%. We're supposed to take 53%, but in fact they got 78%.
That's
right. And then on top of that, after the 67 war, they took 100% of Palestine plus the Golan Heights, which is Syria, and plus Egypt. Since then, Egypt, the Sinai was returned to Egypt, and part of the Golans, in fact, was returned to Syria. But that's
a major part of the Golan is still in Israeli hands,
yes,
and of course they have built a lot of settlements there also.
And Jerusalem, for instance, if we look at the Alamo again, for instance, Jerusalem, in 1967. Just before the 1967 war, Israeli built up areas in Jerusalem, this here. But since 1967, this is the expansion. And this is occupied territory under international law. It's illegal to annex, but Israel had annexed Jerusalem, which is a violation of international law. So I don't see United States troops going and invading in support of international law. But this is just to give an idea. And I want to put another map, in fact, on the Alamo to show, I mean, you know, the tragedy of the creation and the genocide perpetrated by the Zionists on the Palestinians. These are all areas that have been, you know, these are villages and towns that have been depopulated. Arab towns, depopulated, you see, by the Israelis, you know, since 1948. And that, in fact, because of that, what is created now is refugee camps. All these are refugee camps in Lebanon, You know, there are about 12 of them, I suppose. In Syria, you know, all these are refugee camps. We're talking about millions of people in refugee camps, like, you know, 3 million plus. So that is the result of the creation and of the state of Israel and the depopulation of Palestine, you know. And it is also the result of what we are witnessing on the West Bank and Gaza Strip in terms of resistance to occupation. Yeah. So just to give us an idea about that.
I would like to mention that it's one of the tragedies of humanity that a refugee problem lasts so long without any attempt at enforcing the United Nations regulations and decisions on Israel to get these people back, or at least sort of acknowledge the right to return. This is an important issue. Maybe many of them wouldn't want to return, but they should be compensated for the homes that they were driven out of. And the tragedy also is that in Gaza, for example, and in some of the refugee camps in the West Bank itself, the refugees are 3 times over refugees. Mm-hmm. After, you know, settling in one place, they would be encroached upon and driven out of for the second time, or even the third time.
Yeah.
So it's a misery. Actually, in these refugee camps, when I was in Jordan, for example, I used to, you know, travel to the university every day through some of these camps, and you should see some of the weather conditions in the winter with these people living in horrible conditions. And of course, I mean, what could they do? They go on living.
Well, I was in Jordan last year, and I passed by Blata, the camp of Blata. I mean, it just like was an awful thing. But you know, Farideh, on this question of Palestine, which is, I think, is critical and central to the Middle East, what do you see, for instance, you know, you talked about the roadmap and so on, but what do you see beyond the roadmap? How might that factor into relations with other Middle Eastern countries, Syria, Iran, and all that?
Well, I think the discussion of roadmap cannot be done without a discussion of United States military action in relationship to Iraq, because the action against Iraq had essentially 2 components. One was that Iraq is a threat because of its weapons of mass destruction, which effectively, that argument was a question of argument from the beginning, and it has become discredited at this point. Because there were so many questions regarding weapons of mass destruction, then the Bush administration and the Blair administration in England had to come up with a different justification, which was effectively a humanitarian and quote-unquote democratic argument that Iraq was going to become the linchpin of democracy in a region that democracy did not exist. United States was going to bring democracy to Iraq, and then beyond that felt obligated, because it had to obligate itself to the next step, which was to also bring about justice to Palestine, and of course then start to deal with other countries in the area that are considered to be and are undemocratic. Therefore, the military action in Iraq, it's very important, because as it has become installed, as it has been unable to move forward in its, preeminent promise, which is to bring about democracy to Iraq, and of course the step before that is to bring about some sort of stability, normalcy, political reconciliation. Everything else in the area has become questionable. The Bush administration has effectively dealt with the issue by finger pointing, by effectively saying that other countries are to blame for the failure. I mean, it's astounding. As soon as there is a problem, you see Secretary Rumsfeld and others pinpointing other countries, whether it is Syria, whether it is Iran, whether it is Saudi Arabia, as being responsible for the kind of difficulties that the United States is facing in its occupation of Iraq. And as long as that situation continues, the United States in no way is capable goal of trying to come up with some sort of a comprehensive solution, which was the claim about, quote unquote, all of the Middle East problems.
Yeah. I want to go to a piece of interview, segment of interview with Robert Stiver. We're going to play a few of those with Robert Stiver because they are very important for our discussion as well. He's talking here about Israel and what's happening now with Israel with regard to the wall, for instance, that they are building. And then we can discuss the wall in relationship to the settlement and the peace process, so to speak. So when it's ready.
The wall, to my understanding and view in seeing certain maps, is going to be about 370 miles long. It's going to cost perhaps $2 billion by the time it's finished. And basically, I believe it will encircle the West Bank. So it's creating, from the Palestinian viewpoint, a major prison. This prison, the wall, will have various gates or points which will be manned by the Israeli Defense Forces, and Palestinians, if they pass through with all their identification and reasons and everything, the Israelis may let them through the gates, either to move into Israel to work, or, as I understand, there are going to be many Palestinians who will live on one side of the fence, but their livelihood, their agricultural lands are on the other side. Israel has arbitrarily created the contours of this fence to favor the position of its settlements in the occupied West Bank. There is one major deviation from the Green Line, which is the essential borders of the West Bank. There's one major deviation which looks like a finger. Israel arbitrarily moved this fence in this finger shape to encompass a major settlement on its side, on the Israeli side, thereby usurping additional Palestinian land. And the fence is, I think, from the Palestinians' viewpoint, an abomination.
Well, what we're going to do before the discussion and to facilitate that perhaps is to put a few maps on the Alamo to show, how in the 22% what is left for Palestine, from Palestine in just before 1967, that is the West Bank and Gaza. Here, after the occupation, Israeli occupation in 67, here what you have is encroachment, Israeli encroachment on occupied territories by building settlements here, all these blue ones, settlements and settlement areas. And these ones are Palestinian areas that have refugee camps in it, you see. So this is just Gaza. Now, if you think that's bad, here is the West Bank, So Gaza and the West Bank is like 22% of geographic Palestine. All these blue areas are encroachments on Palestinian land. They take them over, the Israelis or the settlers. They take them over and build settlements with the blessing of Israel and a lot of financing from the United States and a lot of loan guarantees by the United States. So this created resistance by the Palestinians. So to try and counter this resistance, one of the tactics by Israel is to put roadblocks and checkpoints. This is Gaza. These are all roadblocks. Whichever you turn, wherever you go, there are roadblocks in your way, But if you think that is bad, well, the West Bank, there are those roadblocks, It's they look like towns, but these are all roadblocks. You cannot turn, So this is the context in which the resistance occurs. And here there's lastly, here there's a map of the wall, So here what you have, this is the built section already of the wall.
Zoom.
Yeah, right, okay. Let's see, Here, that's good. This is the built section of the wall. Right here, okay. So what it's doing, what Bob Stiver is talking about, cutting, population, Palestinian population from one another, and also cutting villages from the fields where they do agriculture, etc. So making it impossible for them to create a natural economy there for their own livelihood and become dependent on Israel as cheap labor, slave labor, in fact. So this is the kind of thing that creates more resistance rather than less, you see. But this is the kind of the blessing that the United States is giving Israel. But this is just to give...
Can I add one point?
Sure.
Here, the wall is not going only to break the West Bank into about 200 separate enclaves, but also largely to break the West Bank into two regions, separated from each other, and non-contiguous. And this, of course, is going to limit to a great extent, nearly abolish the possible viability of the state that is Israel now is pretending to have acknowledged in the future. So what is it? It's not a viable state. What is it? It's a monstrous, stillborn state which is going to be under the complete control of Israel for the future. Who would accept something like that?
I asked Bob Stiver in terms, because he's a peace worker, so he's also was against the war in Iraq and so on. So I want to show that segment about his opposition to the war and why is that. And so then we can discuss that. And then there's another segment later on about the relationship between the Iraq war and the roadmap, and Farideh already commented on it, but we can talk more about it. So when it's ready.
I was opposed to the war with Iraq from the beginning. On January 18th, we had a major rally here at McCoy Pavilion in Alamo Park. I participated in that rally and was consistently opposed to the war. I thought that the Bush administration's build-up to the war was unseemly. I believe that the neoconservative types in his administration had committed themselves to war even before 9/11, ostensibly to remove Saddam's capability with nuclear weapons. But we never made the case for that, and events after the war have certainly proved the point of anti-war advocates that Iraq had no deliverable weapons of mass destruction, much less nuclear type. I think we undertook a regime change. We invaded a sovereign nation which is nearly, if not totally, without precedent. I believe my country was totally incorrect in that invasion. I suspect the fundamental reasons behind that invasion, and I think we are now, no matter what anyone says, in a quagmire. We say our military people and Bremer, the administrator of Iraq, say that the resistance is restricted to Iraq's old Tikrit area, which is somewhat, I think, north and perhaps east of Baghdad. And we have military troops in there running operations all the time. We just started another one today, August 11th, because there is resistance to our occupation. If we ever overcome that resistance in that area, then I can see that the Shiites in the south will begin to look around and say, well, the American occupiers are still here. We'll then develop and suffer resistance in that area. I believe it'll go around the country. We're in a quagmire. The best thing we could do is get out right now.
What do you think, Farideh?
I don't think United States can afford to get out right now. I mean, it's United States. That was, I was opposed to the war, not because I did not want Saddam Hussein to be gone, because as an Iranian, I know exactly what Saddam Hussein has done. I was opposed to the war because I thought United States, because of the divisions that it exists within this society, has the capability to destroy, but does not have the capability to rebuild. That is to say, it will muster its military machine, wreak havoc, and then domestic opposition will force the United States to leave Iraq and leave it in a mess that would be totally destabilizing to the whole region. I think it's important for people to understand what has happened to Iraq. Iraq, after 10 years of sanction and 10 years of continuous bombing between 91 and 2003, has been so devastated that after several years, after several months, the United States is still unable to bring back electricity to Baghdad, and they are effectively saying, or the whole Iraq, oh, we are so surprised that the infrastructure is so debilitated. Leaving Iraq at this time is an incredible abdication of responsibility on the part of the United States. The United States went into Iraq on the promise that it will rebuild Iraq and make it a decent country. The left in this country, the progressives in this country, should hold the United States responsible for that promise, rather than allowing it to abdicate its responsibility. Leaving Iraq will, already you have all these incredible fundamentalist forces moving into Iraq, ready to create havoc. They have absolutely no agenda except the agenda of forcing the United States out of Iraq. As the action of bombing of United Nations headquarters today in Iraq suggests. I am not suggesting this because I have trust in the United States and its ability to rebuild, but I think the progressive forces in the United States have to make the United States pay and hold it responsible for the promises it has made.
Excuse me, but I maybe differ with you, because if I'm making a mistake now, I'm going to go into the quagmire further and further and cause more messes and more trouble and more problems. And what's more, important for the American public is the death of soldiers every day. The soldiers are bleeding there and they are dying every day, and the resistance movement is picking up. And it would be much better if I admitted that I made a mistake and then invited the international community to come in and take over.
Well, first of all, I don't think there is no problem with inviting the international community to come and help. And in fact, one of the biggest fights at this point is effectively over whether or not the international community should come in, and of course the international community's resistance to come in under the tutelage of American administration. Obviously, there has to be negotiations over what has to be done, but that's a different kind of argument than saying United States got to leave. United States has responsibilities. American public, which supported the war, has to understand that yes, Iraq has costs, no doubt about it, and some of it has, the costs are in terms of American body bags, but believe me, in terms of what has happened in the past 3 or 4 months, many, many more Iraqis have died because of American action, And but you have to ask the question of what America leaving Iraq will accomplish in terms of the future rebuild of Iraq. Who will come and take over? United Nations simply does not have the kind of capabilities and support, financial supports that it needs to have to rebuild Iraq. United States is the country that has to invest that kind of financial responsibility in rebuilding Iraq. And if it refuses to do so because it says that my public does not support that, I think ultimately the people of Iraq will pay for this.
Yeah, well, I think the contradiction here is that the United States went in thinking, with its arrogance of power, that it can, it's duck soup for it, But actually it finds that it is really sinking deeper and deeper. Now, damn if you do, damn if you don't. I cannot leave because of all these things you mentioned, but then I cannot stay because, and that is the problem. So leave or not leave, the fact of the matter, that area is gonna, the Middle East that is gonna witness even more
turmoil.
And this is the tragedy of intervention in the first place. But also, the United States doesn't care really about troops dying or not dying or however many they die. The administration, yes. Yeah. Because, look at the first Gulf War syndrome. What are they doing to those veterans who went there and sacrificed? You see, that's my point here. It is, they have the imperative of empire, the imperative of domination. World domination, and strategically important for that world domination is domination of the Middle East. The United States is not going to leave the Middle East. It's going to go in, it's going to stay in there, but the fact of the matter is going to create more turmoil. And this is the tragedy, and this is the contradiction between leaving or not leaving, you see. So that's what we have to contend with, and that would create really more movements, nationalist movements, fundamentalist movements, Islamist movement, whatever movement there, that would really be a danger for world, for world peace. This is the tragedy, and I think, I don't know. Leave or not leave. Both options are.
But my point is that the United States has come to believe that the military option is the way to rectify the problems of the Middle East. Whether it is military action in Afghanistan, whether it is military action in Iraq, or whether allowing Israel to devastate Palestinian opposition militarily. They are the neoconservatives in the Bush administrations are effectively saying that the Arabs are violent. Let the Israeli military machine, bring them to their knees, and then once they come to their knees, they will negotiate. I think it is time for people to start realizing that military operations without a reconstructive effort are disasters, precisely the kind of disasters. Now, if you allow United States to leave at this point because we can't do it, then, they can go and say, militarily, we
the situation is nearly going to become like that in Afghanistan, for example.
Or even military operations shouldn't have been. The war shouldn't have been in the first place. But now that it's been, we are in a quagmire. We are in a dilemma.
But isn't that reminiscent of Vietnam, for example?
Well,
except the stakes are much higher.
Yeah, much higher. It's a different world, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but the situation itself, not being able to leave and eventually making the decision to leave.
Right. Yeah. But, on this, one of the things that the U.S. is doing is, the relationship between Iraq and the world, and the roadmap, So, Bob Stiver, again, on that particular relationship when it's ready.
There's definitely a relationship between the presentation of the roadmap and our invasion of Iraq. Our shock and awe tactics, I think, were designed to let all the Muslim world, not just the Middle East, but all the Muslim world, including Iran, know that America has the most powerful military ever known. And I think anybody would acknowledge that. But having accomplished those shock and awe tactics and really destroyed the country, we then opportunistically looked toward the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and I believe, in effect, we told the Palestinians, now you know what country is on top here, and Israel is our best friend in the world. Palestinians, you had better do what you need to do under this roadmap, dismantle all your so-called terrorist organizations, and essentially accept an imposed solution. So I do think there was a definite connection between the build-up and the invasion of Iraq and now the roadmap.
Okay, so this is like somewhat similar to what you're saying, but he even says that motion towards war for Iraq is because to show the Palestinians that, hey, we can do this in Iraq, you can do, you better behave and do something. You know, so what do you think of that?
Well, certainly, at least a very important part of the Bush administration, the so-called neoconservatives, the chicken hawks, or whatever you want to call them, does believe that the Arab world, quote-unquote, the Islamic world, only understands force. That is to say, the only way you can talk to these folks is through force, because they don't understand anything else. And therefore, once they see massive American power, they will be put in their place. And of course, United States can go in, effectively designate a prime minister that they even write their his speeches for, and everything will be dandy and good afterwards. But the reality is that you know, the Middle East is a lot more complicated. There are reactions and counter-reactions. And furthermore, within the United States, there are disagreements about how to approach the Middle East. I mean, there is no doubt about that. As I suggested before, in the case of Israeli relationship and the Palestinian questions, many of the neoconservatives in the United States feel that effectively they feel that the United States has tied the hands of Israel. And they should let Israel take care of quote-unquote terrorist problems and should not meddle in the situation. The only problem was that in the process of gaining a coalition of willing for the Iraq war, the United States made promises to its main partner, which was Tony Blair, that once the Iraqi situation is taken care of, the Palestinian issues will also come to the fore. And therefore you have different parts of the Bush administration effectively pushing for some sort of roadmap, precisely at the same time that other parts of the administration are undermining the people that are pushing for the roadmap. So you have effectively both a chaotic policy towards the Middle East, as well as a very dangerous policy towards the Middle East.
Since we are in the Pacific, one of the countries in the coalition of the willing is the Marshall Islands, which is under the thumb of the United States. I mean, you know, so, and a lot of it, Poland, for instance, which depends so much on investment and aid and stuff like that. So, I mean, here, the willing, how willing were they, you know, to begin with?
Willing because there is a price for it, somehow.
So, anything else, Ramsis?
Well, I find that the roadmap itself is full of potholes. And a lot of it really was biased with the Israelis and against the Palestinians because of asking, for example, a lot of the Palestinians. And at the same time, the Palestinians are helpless. They can't do anything because of the fact that Israel had destroyed their infrastructure completely and destroyed their their police force. So how can they stop the violence, for example? And at the same time, Israel continues to provoke Palestinian violent reactions by the raids on the West Bank and Gaza, and killing of militant sort of activists or whatever resistant movement. And at the same time, they continue with more encroachments and arresting Palestinians. They pretend that they release 300 prisoners who have nothing against them. They were, you know, called for that purpose, in particular, exchange and so on. And building more settlements, breaking down a few, you know, what they call a few settlements that were not meant to host any or take in any Israelis, and at the same time building more settlements at the same time more settlements actually, and going on with building the wall and building roads which are for the settlers only, and all these are provocations.
Yeah, just a quick thing on the Alamo. I just want to show the roadmap document. This is from U.S. Department of State, and it's about 7 pages, and it talks about 3 phases of the road to peace, so to speak. But the roadmap, we must say that as far as the Palestinian public is concerned, and the Arab public for that matter, the roadmap is they call it on the West Bank a roadblock, first of all. And we showed you some pictures of roadblocks, and it's a roadmap to nowhere other than just telling the Americans saying, well, we're trying to do something, but those guys don't want, you know, that kind of stuff. But anyway, I just wanted to say that. I wanted to show Bob Stiver. I asked him, like, what could people in the U.S. do, you know, to try and, you know, figure out what's going on in the Middle East and what kind of policy would be wise for the United States to pursue, you know. So we have that segment with Bob Stiver.
The power of the Israeli lobby in this country is simply awesome. And I believe as a democracy, we need to have the other side of the picture. We need to let the people decide for themselves what is good. We're a representative democracy, but right now, AIPAC has sway over the press, over Congress, over the executive branch, and I believe that is not representative democracy. So people like me, whether it be by the internet or by mail or by meetings, participation in Sabeel, for example, we need to get the word out that the Palestinians are dying still daily, as I've read by a very great author, Israel's senseless brutality toward the Palestinian people must end.
Yeah, he's talking about AIPAC, which is the part of the lobby, the Israeli lobby, pro-Israel lobby. It's America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, you know. Okay, Ramsis, anything on that?
Well, what he said is very important, because I'm sorry to say, most or a big section of the American public opinion do not know about these things, and the press and the media have played a very nasty role in depriving people from learning the facts of what's happening in the Middle East. And this is going to cause a lot of trouble if the neoconservatives, as Farideh has been saying, the neoconservatives continue to hold sway on the decision-making process in the United States. And eventually, the only answer to the only big or superpower in the world will be one single superpower left, which is the world public opinion, including the public opinion in the United States. People are going to grow weary of what's happening. The families of those people who are dying in Iraq are going to feel the pressure, and bleeding the armed forces like that for a purpose of a sort of world empire is not conducive to welfare in the United States. As we see, the budget is being bled for these kinds of things, and the popular projects are being rolled back. Lots of the popular advantages and progress that took place in the 20th century are being rolled back. So it's our only hope is the peace-loving public opinion of the world and especially in the United States and Israel itself. If you see what's happening in Israel, people now are going to the other side of the fence and saying, we don't want the settlements. We can give the settlements up if we can gain peace. So 56% of the public opinion of Israel are now for giving up settlements for peace.
Yeah, so there's a shift here.
There's a shift, obviously.
So, yeah, Farideh, would you agree with that kind of assessment, or?
Israel is a very fractured society, and its public opinion shifts dramatically. Depending on the kind of violence it experiences. So whenever it feels extremely threatened by what it considers to be Palestinian terrorism, it moves towards reaction. And whenever it feels a little bit more comfortable, it moves, because it has about a 20% population that shifts depending on the security it feels. It's important to understand that Israel is a fractured society, and 20% of its population are Palestinians, so the kind of security talk, the kind of advertisement that occurs, propaganda about the threat that Israel is facing vis-a-vis the Palestinians affects the Israeli polity tremendously. But there is no doubt that the Palestinian society, the Israeli society, is very much a society that is also trying to figure out exactly which direction to go, because the kind of militarism that it has practiced since 1967 has not worked. It has not brought it security. I just want to say something regarding to what Ramsis says. I don't think the problem is merely neoconservatives. Okay, I think it's important to understand that the peace process, what ultimately came out of the peace process under the Clinton administration, the famous great offer that Barak put on the table, divided the West Bank into effectively different cantons. That is to say, the map that they could finally produce, because they never got to that point to actually come up with a final map. The map that they produced was a map that had crisscrossing highways that effectively divided, and this was before the war. I think that's important to understand. I think the problem in the United States is lack of democracy, and the fact that money effectively is what counts in terms of the decisions that are being made in Washington. I think it's important for people to understand that the AIPAC, American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, does not only have influence in terms of United States policies towards Israel, but it has influence towards the policies towards the region. For example, the United States extraterritorial sanctions that are imposed against Iran, whenever there are hearings on those sanctions, the only people that show up are AIPAC. There are no Iranian exile community there. It is AIPAC that is for those sanctions. So it effectively dictates the policy the United States has towards Iran. So its reach is far beyond what people think it is. It is not only related to Israel, and more importantly, its reach has to do with the fact that effective democracy, participatory democracy in this country has been undercut by money.
And this stands to reason why AIPAC does so, because on behalf of Israel, what it does basically is wants Israeli politics in that area to be dominant, and Israel wants to be the dominant country in the area.
I want to say that AIPAC does not represent Israel. It represents a particular faction within Israel, because there are lobby groups in the United States like Israeli Policy Forum that represent other points of view within Israel, and they are the ones who also constantly complain about the domination of an organization like AIPAC over.
But effectively, I mean,
it is
Israeli
AIPAC.
Governments is
Sharon's,
I want to show something on the Alamo quickly. to underscore one thing you said in terms of the West Bank. For instance, the Y Memorandum 1998, and this is the agreement which is pretty bad. You know, why? Because it has also Israeli settlements, you know, the blue area, Israeli settlements, all the blue area, and then projected settlements or Israeli construction also in that yellow, all the yellow here, among Arab areas, which is in this pink, you know, color.
So the whole thing is among Arabs. Yes.
Yeah, among Arabs. Yeah. I mean, among Arabs in that pink area, you know. But the one with Barak is even worse. The map is even worse than this. Just to give us an idea on that, I want to go quickly to Bob Stiver and his view on Christians in Palestine and in the Middle East also.
My wife, who is a Japanese person, was baptized 20 years ago, and she led me into a more devout, more formal Christianity. So even though I was baptized as a baby, as a Lutheran, I became baptized again in our faith, in our denomination, which is the Baptist denomination, and that spiritual acceptance of and commitment to and closeness to the Prince of Peace, my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, have had a great deal to do with my greater involvement in peace and hope for the entire world. Even though many of these Christian Zionists are in my own Baptist denomination, fortunately we are free enough as a denomination that we have a choice. And my choice is certainly not to be a Christian Zionist. The Christian Zionists follow a program called dispensationalism. It's very complicated, and I will not try to express what it is, but essentially their view of dispensationalism requires them to support the Jewish movement, the Zionist movement in the Holy Land now. They believe the Holy Land, through biblical prophecy, must and does belong through God to Israel. Of course, there are many different interpretations of the Bible, and I do not subscribe to any advocacy that says that today's Israel, which was formed via the United Nations in the 1947 Partition Plan, that today's Israel has the right to hold sway over the entire Holy Land, displace, kill, institutionalize, do whatever they want to the wonderful Christians and Muslims of Palestine.
Well, you know, I mean, I just wanted to end with that because I think people think that, you know, there are only Muslims in Palestine and, you know, that's it. So just wanted to say that. But we're flat out of time, and thank you very much for your participation and the discussion. And
thank you for asking us.
And we still have some more time, I'm told now. One more minute. But if that is the case, then is there something that you would like to say quickly about, you know, those kinds of perceptions, Farideh?
Middle East is a highly misunderstood place in the world, and is reflected by the fact that over 50% of the population in the United States still think that Iraq was responsible for 9/11.
Yeah.
And I think if United States is going to play a positive role, its population have to become more aware of what exactly is happening in the Middle East.
Right. So anyway, thank you very much. Now we're flat out.